From the moment he stepped into the bright, gleaming supermarket carrying his daughter's frayed backpack and his own exhaustion like invisible weights on his shoulders, the whispers began. It wasn't unusual for people to look at Samuel with a mixture of pity and discomfort. He had grown used to that, but on this particular evening, as the rain soaked through his thin jacket and his shoes left faint, muddy prints, with every step, the world felt unusually sharp, cruel, and uninviting. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their cold glow on a man who had spent the last few years trying to keep himself from collapsing under the strain of life. And when his trembling hand placed a small loaf of bread and a carton of milk onto the counter, no one, not even Samuel himself, could have predicted the moment that would unfold and how it would echo in every heart that witnessed it. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of compassion, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Samuel had never planned to become a father at 31, nor had he imagined raising his daughter alone. His wife, Evelyn, had been the bright warmth in his life, the buoy that kept him afloat even on the hardest days. When she fell ill with a sudden, aggressive condition that took her from them within a year, Samuel's world shattered in ways he didn't know how to articulate. Their daughter, Lily, only 6 at the time, had grown quiet afterward, drawing little pictures of their family, tiny, colorful worlds on paper where her mother still existed, smiling, whole and alive. Samuel kept those drawings tucked inside an old coffee tin, pulling them out at night when his grief felt too heavy to contain. But despite the sadness that often clouded their lives, Samuel fought every day to hold on to hope. He worked odd jobs, repairing old furniture, carrying boxes for small local shops, mowing lawns, anything that provided a few extra dollars to keep food on the table. Yet no matter how hard he tried, it always seemed like they were one small step away from falling into a darkness he wasn't sure he knew how to escape. That evening began like many others. Rain hammered aggressively against the windows of the cramped apartment he and Lily shared. Their landlord had already warned Samuel that the next month's rent must be paid on time, no exceptions. Samuel had nodded, pretending everything would be fine, but he knew he didn't have enough. He had spent the last of their money on electricity and school supplies. The food in their fridge was down to its bare bones, the shelves nearly empty, and as Lily sat at the small kitchen table drawing pictures of her mother, again her small stomach let out a faint growl she tried to hide. Samuel heard it anyway. He always did. It clawed at him, made him feel like a failure even though he was trying harder than anyone around him could understand. He told Lily he'd be right back and grabbed the few coins he could gather, barely enough for simple essentials. He walked through the downpour with a kind of determination that came only from desperation, hoping the supermarket wouldn't be too crowded. But even if it was, he didn't have a choice. He needed to bring something home for his daughter to eat. Something that would fill her belly even if only for one night. When he entered the store, dripping, exhausted, and carrying the weight of his life in his weary eyes, no one bothered to hide their stares. Samuel swallowed their silent judgments and moved quickly through the aisles, selecting the cheapest loaf of bread he could find, and a small carton of milk just past its prime, but still safe enough for Lily. He squeezed the carton gently, hoping it would last a couple of days. When he reached the checkout counter, he immediately noticed the young store clerk, barely 20, chewing gum loudly, scrolling on his phone with an expression of boredom plastered across his face. The clerk didn't glance up until Samuel's items made a faint thud on the conveyor belt. Even then, his eyes flicked only briefly towards Samuel before a smirk crept across his lips. He scanned the items lazily, tapping the screen with exaggerated motions, clearly making no effort to mask his disdain. As Samuel reached into his pocket for the few coins he had, the clerk let out a sharp laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby customers. Samuel froze, his hand tightening around the coins. The clerk leaned forward, eyeing the items on the counter with mock curiosity. It was the kind of laugh people used when they wanted everyone else to join in, to collectively belittle someone already at their lowest. The spectators didn't speak, but their eyes did. Some widened with confusion, others narrowed with judgment, but none of them stepped in. The clerk scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically. The sound seemed to echo. He said something snide under his breath about people who came in without real money, about how pathetic it was to buy the bare minimum, like some charity case. The customers around pretended not to hear, but their silence was as sharp and cruel as the words themselves. Samuel felt something inside him collapse, an invisible piece of himself that he had worked so hard to hold together since Evelyn died. His hands trembled, his throat tightened. He wished for a moment that he could disappear from the world entirely, but then he remembered Lily. Her soft voice, her quiet drawings, her small hands clinging to his shirt on nights when grief crushed her. He remembered the promise he made to Evelyn at her bedside that he would protect their daughter, no matter what it cost him. And so, instead of crumbling, he slowly straightened his shoulders. The clerk's words still stung deeply, but Samuel forced himself to breathe, to stand tall, to push the pain aside long enough to continue. Just as he moved to place the coins on the counter, the clerk raised a hand, smirking again, prepared to deliver another cruel remark about how the store wasn't a charity. But Samuel spoke first, and it was his voice, not loud, not angry, but steady, calm, and full of a quiet dignity that silenced the entire supermarket. He explained that he wasn't buying these items for himself. He was buying them for his daughter who had lost her mother, who drew pictures at night to remember the happiness she once had, who never asked for more than he could provide, even when she was hungry. He described how he worked long days and longer nights, how he walked through storms like the one outside, just to put anything on the table. And then, with a courage he didn't know he had left, he told the clerk that mocking people who were struggling didn't make him superior. It only highlighted how fortunate he was never to know what desperation felt like. He said all of this without bitterness, without anger, just a raw honesty that pierced through every listener in the store. By the time he finished, the supermarket had grown painfully silent. The clerk's smirk vanished. His confidence dissolved. Several customers shifted uncomfortably, shame flickering in their eyes. One elderly woman placed her basket down and dabbed at the corners of her eyes. A man who had been pretending to browse nearby stepped closer, guilt written plainly on his face. Everything in that moment felt suspended, like time itself had paused to absorb Samuel's words. Then something unexpected happened. A middle-aged woman in a rain-soaked coat approached him quietly, placing her hand gently on his arm. Without a word, she reached into her purse and pulled out a few bills, enough to cover not only his small items but far more. Another customer followed, offering him a warm bag of groceries he had just purchased. And then another. Within moments, Samuel found himself standing before a small crowd of strangers who, one by one, contributed in their own ways, some with money, some with food, some with simply an encouraging smile that reminded him he wasn't as alone as he thought. Samuel tried to refuse at first, insisting he didn't want charity, but the woman in the rain-soaked coat looked at him with kindness and said that helping one another wasn't charity, it was humanity, that sometimes people fell, and there was no shame in accepting a hand when the world grew too heavy. Her words broke something open inside him, but not in a painful way, in a healing way he hadn't expected. With trembling hands and misty eyes, Samuel finally accepted the help. When he left the store, carrying more groceries than he had dared hope for, the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. The air smelled fresh and clean, like the world had shifted, even if only slightly. He walked home with a lighter heart, the bags dangling from his hands as though they were filled not with food but with the unexpected kindness of strangers who had witnessed one man's struggle and chose to act with compassion instead of judgment. When Samuel entered the apartment, Lily looked up from her drawing, her eyes widening with surprise at the sight of the groceries. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, her tiny voice muffled against his shirt as she thanked him for bringing home so much food. Samuel held her close, breathing in her warmth, her innocence, realizing that the moment in the store had given him something he hadn't felt in years, hope. That maybe, despite all hardships, there was still goodness in the world, that people still cared. The next morning, Samuel returned to the store, not to confront the clerk, but to thank the manager for allowing him the chance to speak his truth. Instead, he found out something unexpected. The clerk had requested to speak to him. Nervous but willing, Samuel agreed. When the young man approached him, he was a stark contrast to the arrogant clerk from the day before. His eyes were downcast, his posture slouched in shame. He apologized, not with empty words, but with a sincerity that Samuel immediately recognized. The young man explained that he had been dealing with family pressure, financial struggles of his own, and had taken out his frustration on the wrong person. He said he'd never realized how deeply a few careless words could wound someone already struggling. In that moment, Samuel didn't offer anger or resentment. Instead, he extended forgiveness, because he understood what it meant to carry burdens in silence, to drown beneath problems nobody else could see. The clerk's shoulders sagged with relief, and the encounter ended with a quiet understanding between two people who now saw each other for who they truly were, humans doing their best, failing at times but capable of growth. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel's life didn't magically become perfect. There were still challenges, still bills, still uncertainties. But the shift within him was undeniable. He no longer walked with the weight of shame, no longer believed he was invisible to the world. Lily sensed the change in him too, and her drawings grew brighter, more color, more sunshine, more hope. Samuel continued working tirelessly, but opportunities began to grow. The man who had offered him groceries connected him with a steady job at a local workshop. The elderly woman who had dabbed her eyes recommended him to a friend in need of a handyman. Slowly, piece by piece, Samuel rebuilt his life, not alone this time, but supported by a community that had seen his struggle and stepped into his story with empathy instead of judgment. And every time Samuel passed that supermarket, he carried with him the memory of the moment when a poor father stood his ground, when words born from pain transformed a crowd, when compassion defeated cruelty, and when the reply of a tired but brave man silenced an entire room, not through anger, but through truth and dignity. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more meaningful stories to life. Before you go, please comment below and tell us one act of kindness you'll never forget.